you're a Danish lad from Denmark, came over here a number of years ago.
The rugby club I played for was a shipbuilder yard rugby team. Great lads, you know, but it was quite rough. So it kind of made me grow up in a way. Probably like put up a shield to kind of fend off these things. I don't believe in karma. I just believe in doing good things with people. If I give you time today, be positive to you today, you might give that to someone else another day. In Denmark, we'd call it Åbenhed. So it's all about openness. It's not that we need anyone to say, oh, that's really sad for you, or that's really bad for you. Just someone to say, I hear you. Newest research will tell you, regard muscles when you get old, if you don't use it, you lose it. I tend to say that movement is medicine, and when you do move, you know, your body responds a lot better than when you're producing stress hormones. I will never earn enough money to drive a Ferrari. Not that I'd be able to fit in one. That's not my drive. My drive is always my family. I had a supporting family. I go back to the story when I went to the under-19s World Cup as a 16-year-old. You know, my training before going was my dad, good old Rocky style. I think it's being present. When people take on a challenge, it's understanding where you are when you start that challenge. For me, the process is probably more important than the outcome. And I think what you can't forget is actually how awesome you are going through that process of getting there. Because that probably tells more about you as a person than getting that gold medal at the finish line. Pain isn't always bad. Pain is just there to let you know that something isn't 100% yet. And I can remember I was working once in the clinic I used to work at just when I came to the UK. And a guy came in one day and he said, Kev, he said, you look like shit today. I said, oh, I said, I feel it. And he said, I'll ask you one question. Is it going to kill you? So I went, no. So that's what you're worried about. I said, and that's kind of one thing I take with me.
Hello, I'm Ed, and I'd like to welcome you to our podcast series, Tackling It Together, brought to you by Little Blackbird, where we will be having open, honest and important conversations with some inspirational guests. Okay, and welcome to the Little Blackbirds Tackling It Together podcast. Today we are with Kev Steele. I know Kev from the rugby days when we played together years ago. We're here back at Chester Rugby Club. But now the proud owner of Steele Therapies over in Wrexham. So physiotherapist for how long, Kev?
21 years.
So what did you start when you were about 5?
I wish. No.
So we're going to get the perspective of a professional, a physio today, but also through my experience of working with you, a physio that's a bit different in terms of your approach. So, to start off, why did you say yes to the podcast?
I felt I couldn't say no. Honestly, I won't lie to you, I felt I couldn't say no. But then, I did kind of reflect over it, and in some ways I think it's so important to help each other. So that's why I kind of wanted to do it. So I watched a couple of episodes, previous episodes, I've seen a couple as well, and then after watching them, I thought I kind of just want to give it a go and see if I can help in any way or learn from it. You know, I learned from, to be fair, I learned from watching some of your episodes anyway. So,
Which one stood out for you?
The one I did watch, my recent one was with Kev. And I think it was more about talking about the vulnerability because I think that's such a big part, especially for blokes, you know, around our age. I think vulnerability is a thing we don't really touch enough on.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. I want to tap into that. So you're a Danish lad from Denmark, came over here a number of years ago, all settled down with your family. But I think it might be interesting to tap into that from the Danish culture, from that transition from Denmark over to the UK. Because vulnerabilities, people view it in different ways, don't they? People have a relationship with it, people don't. So we'll get into that. We'll have a good conversation around that. And you know the purpose, we've obviously known each other for a few years. The purpose is to kind of get real people, real stories, real perspectives. And I say that from vulnerability, I lost a friend just over 2.5 years ago to suicide. So I've got a deep understanding and I'm on a bit of a quest to understand more about this vulnerability stuff. That's the purpose as to why we're doing it. So where are we going to start?
So we lived for numerous years in Denmark, had the kids in Denmark, and then my wife wanted to come back to the UK. So
so you met when you were in Denmark?
we met traveling abroad on a beach in Thailand. It's going to sound really corny, a story about it, but we met in Thailand. We stayed in touch, and then at one point she wanted to come to Denmark to visit me, and at this time I was going to start work because I'd been 4 or 5 weeks in Thailand. So she said, can I come visit you? I was like, yeah, fine. She said, I'll come Monday this day. I said, perfect. I'll land on the Sunday. And then I thought, bugger, I've got work Monday. So I always say now, I say the same to my kids, never say no to an opportunity. So I rang my bosses as soon as I got home Sunday and told them that I had an infection in my foot. And I had to go see the GP on the Monday. And go see GP the Monday. And I did have an infection, so, not one of the nasty ones, just, blister. And I had it sorted, I had it treated, I had medication. And then he said, you're fine, Kev, you're fine to work. I said, no. I said, I kind of need you to write me a sick note. I said, why is that? I said, I think I met the woman I'm going to marry. And I know this GP since I was born. So he's like, cool, I'll write you a sick note. So I was like, perfect. I said, anything else that you do? He said, no. I said, just take medication for 10 days and you should be fine. So I leave the doctors, walk to the clinic, put a stone in my shoe because I had to look a bit real. Walk in.
Stone in
it was my foot, wasn't it? Present, a letter. And then after that, they were like, yep, fine, Kev, we'll see you in a week. And then my wife landed a couple of hours later, and for a week, I just had to hide around my city. And from there, just kind of developed back and forth. And at some point, she came to Denmark, and she wanted to come back to the UK. Because I think living abroad is hard, it is tough. In all fairness, she was brilliant. She learned how to speak Danish, kind of integrate in society, understand probably all the differences between Danish culture, British culture, and kind of, be able to manage it and blend in. But I think she's looking for a purpose, a deeper purpose.
Yeah.
And she's brilliant at what she does. So, she wants to come back to the UK, and I don't think I had a choice. I came back.
There you go. Well, yeah, that's a different...
There's no point lying,
Yeah. So tell me a bit about that transition then. So coming over to the UK, were you a practicing physio over in Denmark at the time?
Yeah. So, I was working in a private clinic in Denmark. Our system is slightly differently structured than the UK. We still got NHS, but our private clinics work quite closely with the NHS with NHS. So I worked there in a clinic with 10 other colleagues, and heaps of different patient groups, and loads of freedom within the treatment. And and then came over here, and that's probably where the biggest challenge had started. Because I won't lie to you, and I said to my wife in retrospect now that I thought I was going to absolutely ace it coming over here, but I didn't. I struggled. First you have to kind of be recognised as a physio over here. So you fill out a lot of paperwork. You got to go back 10 years back, in your studies and translate everything. It was quite. It was a long process to get through. It took probably with everything with the waiting period. It took about a year.
Right.
So, but that didn't stop me doing things. I still tried to get involved, in sports. Get out there, and mind the kids. Be a bit of a stay-at-home dad, which I absolutely loved. And then slowly just, got my registration. And then I had to, again, look for a job and start working.
Right.
So, but it was tough because coming from Denmark, I had a really well-paid physio job. I had safety, I had family around. And coming over here was, that was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
To a point where I probably kind of hit rock bottom. But I think I kind of needed that I think that just realization of, you're vulnerable. You're not bulletproof, and it's okay not to be okay, and ask for help.
And what was your relationship with vulnerability as a lad growing up in? I mean, I know nothing other than our conversations about the Danish culture. What was your relationship with vulnerability back then?
I think I always worked hard. Like I played rugby in Denmark. Rugby's a minority sport in Denmark. So at the age of 16, I went to the under-19s World Cup representing Denmark in Italy many years ago. I think Wales won that year actually in the under-19s. Yeah. And then from there, at the age of 17, I think I just turned 18. I made my debut for the Danish national team. So from quite a young age, I had to fit in with adults and be able to be able to manage myself around adults. And the rugby club I played for was a shipbuilder yard rugby team. You know, they was hard as nails, as rough as anything. Great lads, you know, but it was quite rough. So it kind of made me grow up in a way. Probably like put up a shield to kind of fend off these things. Yeah. And then I think I've always had a drive. I was that support of my mum and dad, you know, to do whatever I wanted to do. I didn't really feel vulnerability as such.
No.
I think came over here, that's where it was like realization that, you know, even though I speak the language because my dad's English, even though he kind of look the same, you know, eat the same foods, you know, you've got an English, name, it doesn't just transfer to being English or being British as such. Yeah. So that was probably the hardest challenge. And I think I had to come to terms with that myself. And then my wife was brilliant when I kind of hit the wall on that. And I can remember I was working once in a clinic I used to work at just when I came to the UK. And a guy came in one day and he said, Kev, he said, you look like shit today. I said, I feel it. And he said, I'll ask you one question. Is it going to kill you? So I went, no. I said, so what are you worrying about? And I kind of took that with me. And I thought, Christ, I was worried about, you know, some things. And looking back, I'm like, why did I worry about those things? Now I don't. Yeah. You know, because now I know it's not going to kill me. You know, whatever I worry about then, it's not going to kill me. Yeah. And the funny thing was actually many, many years later, before I opened my own clinic, this gentleman comes in one day. He looks like shit. And I said, you look like shit. I said, you look like shit. And he went, I feels it. I said, I'll ask you one question. Is it going to kill you? He went, no. And he went, I said that 2 years ago. I said, yeah, you did. I said, and that's kind of one thing I take with me. So that was quite interesting. It's mad that,
isn't it? It's those little light bulb moments of rationalisation. Like just to be rational. Is it going to kill you? Is it going to affect anything? Is it the be all and end all? Because we catastrophise, don't we? We catastrophise a lot. And you must see that a lot with people on the bed coming in and training for events and things maybe not going to plan. And I recall when, obviously I did the marathon a few years ago, Chester Marathon, and I went to you and you got me sorted up. I was a retired rugby player. My bloody glutes were in bits. But I always remember with you, whenever I'd be on the bed and you'd have your bloody elbows and God knows what, massage in those areas, we had some really good, deep, meaningful conversations. We talked a lot about the coaching philosophy, around behavioural profile and all that kind of stuff. We spoke about all of it. So how would you summarise your philosophy as a physiotherapist or as an owner of a clinic?
I'd probably go back to just before COVID lockdown. I was doing a high performance practitioner course with a really good friend of mine, Klaus Wiley, who lives in Denmark. He's worked with Ben Ryan, England rugby, but the rugby players that are struggling with injury, etc. And it was all about the disc. It's all about behaviours. Understand these 4 pillars of behaviours. And the first time I did it was when I was involved with the Danish Sevens team as a physio. I didn't quite understand how these pillars would work. To be honest, I thought if you answered on some of these questions in a softer way, it might show you were weak. So I think I was quite in my dominant phase then at that time. So I probably didn't get a clear view of how I would operate as a person. But second time around, I thought, right, I'm going to sit down, completely blank piece of paper, and just fill out what's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I did, and again, it showed my profile. And it taught me a lot about understanding how I operate as a person, but also from this course, I learned how to read other people's behaviors. So to kind of sound quite rough is if you understand those people's behaviors, you can speak to people's behaviors more than the person, if that makes sense. So if you're quite dominant as a person, you might alter your treatment to kind of satisfy their behavior of control. So I don't mind giving up that control as such, because ultimately I'll probably always get what I want, is trying to make you better. I might just have to change the storyline of how that suits you. So it's hard to say if I've got one philosophy. I think for me, I think you can always help someone, and that's probably why I do physios, want to help people. But that say journey, that rehab journey is also a journey for me, because it's learn about you You know, learning about your traits, your strengths, you know, your work-ons.
Yeah.
But that also teaches me that I can take those teachings, those learnings for me and use in my own life.
Yeah.
You know, there might be things I miss from there that I can use.
So what are your drivers as a professional then? So I know it's to help people, but you've got a family, you're 2 lads who are big rugby players, so you're travelling all around supporting them. You mentioned your wife as well. What are your core drivers right now?
My drive's always my family and the dog. No, for me, one thing is family.
Yeah.
Family first. That's always been strong for me. You know, I got my parents back in Denmark, you know, and I speak to them probably daily. You know, I have a daily phone call. So family for me is number one. Being happy is a big thing for me. And just, for me, it's being a part of a team, you know, being part of a family, being part of a group. I think there's a lot of strength to find in that. So that's something I focus on.
Yeah, and we've had chats about, well, obviously we're both business owners, we've had chats about kind of business and balance. Do you strive for the growth, for the success of the business, or do you maintain that balance? So what's your view on that?
I normally say to people, lady, that I will never earn enough money to drive a Ferrari. Not that I'd be able to fit in one, but I'll just never be able to own a Ferrari. That's not my drive. My drive is, first and most, I want to help people. I want to have a really good balance with my job, with my family life. So like my oldest son living away, being able to go watch him play his games in midweek, be able to follow my youngest, you know, in what rugby he's into, and that's my core is that balance, being able to do that. And then I don't mind when I get older, or when they get older. I mean, because we're always getting older. When they get older, I don't mind working more. So it's probably opposite to a lot of people that want to retire super young. I don't really want to retire. I want to do this for the rest of my life, as long as I can do it. I really enjoy it. I love my job. So, and that's why probably my philosophy when it comes to my physio is, I won't be the physio that will see you twice a week for 8 weeks. Because for me, financially, it'll be a massive bonus. But as a person, I don't feel that's the right way to do it. So that comes in, ties in, say we talk about the philosophy, ties into my approach that I want you to take ownership of your situation, your rehab journey.
Yeah.
I see myself more as a facilitator, you know, as an advisor. You know, I don't want to be the primary kind of giver as such. I want you to be the one that drives it, and then I'm there just to kind of, you know, throw things at you that you can use, you know, on your journey.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. So when you talk about you being a facilitator and people taking ownership, in all your years of practice, what are the key things to people kind of succeeding in terms of their recovery or achieving their goals and hitting their targets? You mentioned ownership there. Accountability is probably one thing that pops into my mind. But what have you seen that's the key formula to people achieving and doing well?
I think it's being real. Being real about your ambitions right now, at this moment. Not about where you want to be in 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, but just actually being real where you are now. So let's use your marathon journey, you know, as an example. So most people that take on these, you know, say challenges when we hit our 40s, it's like the century of desperation. You know yourself. You know, it's.
I've had flashbacks to.
Oh yeah, well, God, we've all been there. We're all there. You know. But a lot of people want to take on challenges, which is brilliant. You know, we all do it, and it's you know, I do it for my mental health. I push myself. I can't get that out of a rugby pitch because I don't play rugby anymore.
Yeah.
So I can't get that. So I want that for the challenges, and probably why you do yourself. You know, you do these things. For me, when people take on a challenge, it's understanding where you are when you start that challenge, and probably most people aren't there to start the challenge physically. So if someone wants to say do a marathon, they might start a marathon program that will have them running X amount of minutes or kilometers a week, you know, 4 or 5 times or 3 times how many you got to do. But some people might have to just do a couch to 5K. That might actually be the biggest challenge for them in the whole marathon journey, is actually getting from that couch to those 5K.
Yeah.
And just getting your body adapted to the load, looking, you know, how can you tie in your gym stuff, you know, other activities you might do with the kids, you know, so it kind of becomes not a family thing, but you involve more people into it.
Yeah.
And usually it's easier to get a buy-in from people around you, to support you in your, in your quest. So, so I think it's being ready and being prepped to take on that challenge.
Yeah, yeah. And we were talking just before we started this around. There's a lot of people that watch this, and we look at this we play competitive sport from an early age. How do you manage that transition? From whether it's professional, semi-amateur, whatever it might be, from training Tuesday, Thursday, playing on a Saturday, to hitting those late 30s, 40s, probably people are retiring more in the 30s as opposed to when I played and it was in the 40s. How do you manage that transition and still reap the benefits from the physical activity?
I think in some ways you hit a wall. And I think you have to hit that wall of realization that you're not that Superman, you used to be. You're not that athlete you used to be. Your body changes, your family changes, your situation changes, job changes. And I think you kind of have to go through that process to kind of come out on the other side and then go, I want to smash that marathon. I want to, I like these ultra events, even though it might look like Gimli on Lord of the Rings, going over these hills in the Lake District. But for me, it's that challenge. I love that. That's what I feed off.
So this is ultra walking challenges.
Oh yeah. I try to jog a bit, but I jog down stuff, not up stuff. I did a couple. It was not last year, but year before that. I did one in the Lake District, Peak District. I did with mates of mine in the Lake District. He's now speaking to me again. Didn't speak to me initially after we finished the race.
Why? Was it horrendous?
It was the hottest day of the year, the day we did it. And it was brutal. The heat got to us. And you can check Garmin stats, and my estimated sweat loss was through the roof, 16 litres, it's just unreal. I think I was trying to drink about 30 litres of fluid that day and still there was a deficit. But I loved it when we crossed the finish line. I could have hugged him, almost kissed him. For me, that was it was the biggest challenge at that time, in my life as such. And we finished and we sat down and have some food, and I was buzzing, and I said to him, that was amazing. He's like, Kev, don't ever speak to me.
Never again.
I said, really? He said, yeah, don't ever speak to me. I said, all right then. So what do you think about don't ever speak to me? So we had a phase about 2 hours where we didn't speak. And then we got back to the van. We still had to drive back from the Lake District back to Wrexham, and got in the van and I thought, it'd been a bit quiet, so I said, how about we have a cheeky Mackey's on the way back?
Just to break the ice.
Just to break the ice. And so we did. But the funniest thing was we thought, we'll drop past the Mackey's to drive in and we'll get some chips, a bit of salt, it's good to have a bit of salt after a long day, And then I don't know where the fryer broke down, but we sat there at 2 o'clock in the morning in some Mackey's waiting for a pack of chips, And we'd been on the road all day, walking, jogging, running. And we got back and we were both wrecked. He was wrecked, I was wrecked. And my wife comes in on the day after I came back and she said, how do you feel? I said, I feel rubbish. I feel worn. And she went, bet you happy you didn't sign up for the one in the Peak District in 4 weeks' time. I said, no, I've just done it. So I was lying there on my deathbed, signed up for one 4 weeks later. She said, is your mate going to do it? I said, no. So I do it on my own. She's like, really? I said, yeah. I said, I know I can do the distance. I've done the hottest day of the year. I said, I'll be fine. And talk about the mental side of it now. So I knew the distance in some ways was not an issue for me. I'll get through it. But I wanted to be able to smash those climbs a lot faster than I did in the Lake District. That was something I wasn't happy about. So I'd go to Crow Castle, and there's a place called Donkey Hill, really steep hill at the bottom of Crow Castle. I'd put my backpack on, and I'd walk from the bottom of that up to the top of Crow Castle, up and down, loop it 6 times, just to mentally tire myself out. And then, so when I did hit the one in the Peak District, I was like, I'll be fine. And you know what? I enjoyed it. I met probably about 7-10 blokes that are doing the same as me, all doing on their own, having a chat, and then all the blokes are doing just for the mental health.
Yeah.
So I spent the next 55 kilometers just having a chat with lads about what you were doing in life, and just the random things. But it made the journey so much more eventful, I think, and quicker. So so I think coming back to the whole thing, with the challenges and doing these things, I think just be real about where you are when you start.
Yeah. So this is about your goal setting, your targets.
Yeah, so like we spoke about earlier before we started this, is for me the process is probably more important than the outcome. So I'll give you an example. So when I did my first like event, it was what 55k I think it was, but my prep when I checked my Garmin watch was I'd walked over 1,000 miles from Feb to June in preparation for this, and still I was bricking it on the day of the event. And if I'd looked back and was thought it's a piece of cake, you know, I've done this distance loads of times before that. So, but again, sometimes you probably have to learn the hard way. So I would always say I'd more focus on the process than the outcome. I know the outcome's important for a lot of people. It's achievement, whether you need to post it, whether you want your medal, you do it for charity.
Yeah.
I get all that. I'm all for that. But I think what you can't forget is actually how awesome you are going through that process of getting there.
Yeah.
Because that probably tells more about you as a person than getting that gold medal in the finish line. You know, you being able to commit for so many weeks. You know, change new habits, having to manage your job, your family life, and still want to do your challenges. I think that's pretty awesome, being able to do, you know, more than just that gold medal on the finish line.
What for the amount of people that come through your doors, what are the biggest pitfalls that people are falling into? Maybe men in particular. And I go back to remembering when I came to see you, and we talked about for men glutes. A lot of that tension sits in the glutes for men. So where are the areas that people are not failing but struggling with? What advice would you give people?
Well, newest research will tell you regarding muscles, when you get older, if you don't use it, you lose it. So it's using your muscles. It's junior training, junior resistance training. Whether that's spending time with your family, you know, chucking the kids around, whether it's going to gym, whether it's doing, you know, your jiu-jitsu, your rugby classes, whatever. I think just doing something. So you can always tweak the little things. And I think if we go back to the whole thing about being ready for a challenge, I think that readiness will come if you're active in one way or another. Yeah. Because then you can always tweak it through a physio, you know, your personal trainer, whoever your training partner, you can always, you know, tweak those little things.
Yeah. We had a nutritionist on a few months ago, Danny Webber, and he spoke about the need for that one-to-one approach, that bespoke approach. And you mentioned it before, saying I won't pull you in for 2 sessions a week. Well, it'll be more over a sustained, you know, period of time. How important is that maybe when people hit the 40s, ex-sports people, to actually invest in themselves, whether that's with a coach, a physio, or a nutritionist, someone that just really gets under the skin and puts in that one-to-one approach?
Yeah, again, it's a really good question. I think for me, it's about being present. Being present doesn't mean personal, but just being present and being able to listen. So, because one thing I come across is a lot of people, what they might say battle with or struggle with is sometimes people not listening to what their thoughts, their worries, their concerns, whether it be in a partner, you know, colleagues, teammates, or the fact that they just worry about telling people about how they feel. I would probably say it's more like a mental, emotional side, more than it's the physical side of it.
That's a really interesting point. So what connection do you think there is between, and we hear a lot about that, inflammation now, stress and inflammation. And I would remember that we would have really good chats whilst we were doing that. What do you think the balance is between that emotional kind of offload, when you're openly talking honestly and you're answering those questions and you're listening intently? What's the connection between that and the tension that people hold in their bodies?
Well, we tend to say that movement is medicine, you know, and when you do move, you know, your body responds a lot better than when you're producing stress hormones. Whether that's just going for a walk, but activity, you know, giving people physical contact, massage, but also sometimes find people to move with. Yeah. And if you look at like a lot of the groups now, like Andy's Man Club and other clubs that are popular for men, that can have a walk and a bit of a whinge or a talk or whatever you want to call it. You know, I think that's so important to have. So. And
you said it before with that walk that you did in the peaks, that 55 kilometres, the amount of people that you spoke openly and honestly with. And there's something about when you're walking or whether you're in an event and you're really having to graft, there's an element of vulnerability. And when you're feeling like that, someone else is exactly with you.
Yeah.
And that's a metaphor for probably where men are at the moment, or maybe where we have been for the past 10 years. Don't share that. We don't go shoulder to shoulder with someone and have that walk or have that discussion. Whereas now, it's definitely happening. You know, look at what we're doing here today.
Yeah.
Your example from the walk, there is definitely opportunities where fellas are starting to understand the value of talking, of externalising that internal stuff in there. I suppose, how do we do more of that? As a dad with two lads who are playing sport, what do you try and teach them in terms of what you learned as a young man growing up in sport, outside of sport?
I had a supporting family. Like my dad was, I go back to the story when I went to the under-19s World Cup as a 16-year-old, you know, my training before going was my dad, you know, like good old Rocky style. I think it's being present. For me, it's all about presence. Same when I go, my kids watch, when they used to play football, now they watch rugby, I will look at them all game. So if they look out to me for a bit of reassurance or, you know, just some kind of response of how they're doing, I will be there, put my thumbs up every time. So I'll have chat with parents, everyone else, but when they play, they're my main focus. You can be present in a sitting room on your phone with your kids, but they know if you're not present.
Yeah.
You know, same as we know, you know, if people around us aren't present. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's about being present, and it's giving time. You know, it's one thing I chuckle a bit about after coming to the UK is how people always ask you how you are. Like, you're all right. They don't really want to know. They just do it because they think they have to do it. So I'll go like, no, I feel really shit today. And then you'll see a facial expression change straight away. And then you'll see whether the real people, they want the conversation or they just want to keep going. But one thing I will say is post-COVID, if I went shopping, I had my kids with me. If there's an old chap or an old lady that wanted to talk, we'd spend the time talking with them. And my youngest lad said to me one day, he said, Dad, why do you do that? I said, well, I might be the only guy he sees today. So why wouldn't I do that? Because at one time, that might be me standing there. So I think I don't believe in karma. I just believe in doing good things with people. And then hope people, if I give you time today, be positive to you today, you might give that to someone else another day.
Yeah.
It's not about you paying me back, it's about you paying it forward. So that's kind of what I believe in. And whether it's work. For work, it's super important. I think it's all about that.
We were talking there about vulnerability, but you've got a bit of a philosophy on vulnerability and another term. Tell us a bit about that.
So I probably use different words. So in Denmark, we'd call it Åbenhed. So it's all about openness. So it's more about being open toward each other. So I think vulnerability is quite used a lot in most things. But I think for me, it's important being open towards each other, you know, having those conversations and not being afraid of asking. Sometimes the hard questions, if you see someone is struggling, don't be afraid of asking them.
You said before about, well, men in particular, but sometimes you just need people to listen.
I think it's super important to listen. I struggle with it at times because I love to talk, but I think listening is such a good trait. You know, it's probably a skill you have to train. You know, because like we spoke about earlier, you know, about the fact of being able to speak to people and having to listen, not give you advice, but just for them to listen and go like, okay, I hear you. It's not that we need anyone to say, oh, that's really sad for you or that's really bad for you. Just someone to say, I hear you. Just so you know that thought, that struggle you might walk around with has been heard. You know, you've shared that. You're not alone knowing that secret as such.
Yeah.
So I think being open.
If we could just instill that in this population, into the male population, what impact do you think that would have on the current statistic, which is 74.3% of suicides are with boys and men in the UK?
I think it's a sad number. You know, it's a high number. I think suicide in that category, no matter what sex, you know, gender, age, whatever, I think it's just such a high number. I do think that with men, it's the openness, it's being able to communicate. So, but also not being afraid of asking. Like we've kind of come across this thing of, you know, when you move to the UK and you have people asking how you are all the time, And you're like, oh, they're really interested in me. No, they're not really. They're just being super polite. And I think sometimes it's taking that politeness out and probably putting it around someone and saying, you know what, I think you look like shit today. How you feeling? And then just give them the opportunity to speak.
And some people need that honesty, don't they? I can say that with being here in the rugby club, or it's just that little bit of transparency to say, well, I don't think you look okay, or I don't think you're all right. Maybe backing up with a fact, or you said this, or you just seen that, so I'm going to drop you that fact in again, and then I'm going to ask you again, are you all right? Because then you do seem to get a different response from people, almost like the bluff's being called on someone. Or
like we speak about, if someone asks you how you are, the first thing goes like, yeah, I'm all right. And if you tell yourself that enough times, probably might manifest that to kind of slightly start to believe it, but nah, still behind that barrier, you're still feeling rubbish, or might still feel down. Like we spoke about as well, it's probably the physical contact, put an arm around someone, look someone in the eyes. It's incredibly vulnerable to look someone in the eyes. We talk about openness and be able to kind of accept that someone does that. So it's definitely something that we can learn from, probably should be better at doing. In Denmark, you get, if you ask people stuff, people don't really ask you in the streets how you are. Like my dad lives in Denmark now. He's lived there for about 47, 48 years. He still struggles with it. You're like, oh God, too bloody miserable, Kev. But they're not really. Because as soon as you get to know a Danish person, they'll invite you indoors. You'll come inside the house. They'll look after you. But it's just getting past that barrier first.
Yeah.
And that can be hard. It's something my wife learned when she was there. It can be super tough. So
it's a good way of thinking it. There is a barrier, isn't there? We're talking about that openness. We know there's a barrier, hence the statistics. But there's so many good things. I was talking to a chap the other day about, he worked in a nuclear power plant, and he said, you just have that philosophy of saying, how are you today? Scale of 1 to 10, where's your number? I'm a 4 or I'm a 7, but as soon as you hear anything below a 5, you've then got the opportunity to say, what's that about? And that 4 is a little trigger to get beyond that barrier, where it's like, I can't speak, I can't deliver loads of words on how I'm feeling, but I can give you an answer to that question, which is, I'm a 3, or I'm a 2. Or I'm
I like
4.
that. That's a good way to do it.
And he was saying from a construction point of view, and just to try and tackle the stigma and trying to generate more conversations, it's really easy for someone just to give a one-word answer of a number. And then he said it's not the number, it's the response. And that was it was a talk to a load of football coaches and toxic masculinity, and he come up and had a chat with me at the end. And he said, we'd never have done that 8 years ago or 10 years ago, but now we're starting to. And he said, it really works. And he said, I've went for 2 or 3 coffees with lads recently because their numbers were below a 5, and that's kind of the benchmark.
I like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I know a lot of different organisations and charities use that, but I think that's just ways in which we can bridge that gap, isn't it? That massive gap of that barrier. We were talking before about testosterone and being men, and there's so many things that encompass why that barrier is there. Years of culture and decades of behaviour and loads of things that have got us to that point. But
it's quite interesting to talk about numbers. So in physio, you tend to measure people's pain in numbers. Not really about quality of life. We tend to measure that one thing in pain. So where are you today? Ooh, I'm a 4.
Yeah.
So I go, all right, well, your 4 might be different to my 4. So you say to someone, like a woman, you might say, or childbirth. A bloke, you might say, you've got to find something like a sound. What's the worst pain you can think of? You might think of a certain thing getting caught in the zipper, But then if you haven't tried that, what the heck is a 10 out of 10? So I always say to people, don't worry about the pain. I said, but how's your quality of life? Because pain isn't always something that tells you can't move. This is the thing with rehab and movement is, pain isn't always about not being able to do stuff. It's understanding how your pain works. So you can have an injury, you can rehab from the injury, you can be returned to the injury, and suddenly your pain will start to dip. But at the same time, your strength and tissue is slightly going up. But that tweak between those two is sometimes a bit undefined. So people might say, ooh, I'm not pain anymore. Out running 10K again, boom, injured again. Other people might say, I'm still feeling a bit of pain. Because our brain works in this very specific way that we've had pain, say for about a couple of weeks, coming into a couple of months. Our central nervous system will make a new pathway straight to that area. So as soon as something happens, it'll ring that pain bell straight away. And sometimes we have to reprogram that. So pain isn't always bad. Pain is just there to let you know that something isn't 100% yet. So your tissue can still grow in strength, but you still have that slight little bell. Bit about we spoke about earlier, like with the anxiety. You know, the anxiety part is probably a bit of that bell still ringing, you know, about something's wrong. But there might not be anything wrong. But still writing it until we rewrite it by manifesting something more positive or different strategies or behaviors, it'll still be there ringing that bell. So
I just have flashbacks to when I came and seen you a few years ago, and I was banging on about my calves. That's all I was obsessed about. My calves, they're too tight. I can't get through. And now I know now you were probably getting me to focus on the quality of life side, the why you're doing that, what's the purpose, what's your goals. If your calf grows, what's the worst that can happen?
But to go back to your calves for a second, that was all about building strength. So most injuries, probably in muscle tissue, is all about load and capacity of load. Like you have to build that threshold of what your body can take. And that's the thing that doesn't happen straight away. So like say with your calves, you had to build that capacity, that threshold of load through your training, but you had to trust the process.
Yeah.
Where you were to start with quite outcome focused. So the only thing you wanted was just you wanted it to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't matter what we threw at it. That wasn't going to change until in a way you changed the way you were thinking of managing it.
Yeah.
And that's probably like in the end, when I saw less of you, it's because you found a way to manage that and then you know continue doing your your quest.
Yeah. I think that was pressure of charity and doing it for a charity and all that kind of stuff. Just talk to me a little bit more about that concept of, instead of focusing on the pain, focus on the impact of quality of life. Because that makes sense with your philosophy, I think, as to how you're a little bit different to other physios.
Quality of life, I think, should be number one. That comes down to like my family, the way I work, other things, be with my kids, watch my kids. For me, that's quality of life. So we can have a pain somewhere, and I still believe you can manage that. So because you can have a pain and you can choose to sit in the corner and not do anything about it. Look at how can you make yourself better. So, or you can choose to say, right, I've got a pain. How can I manage it? Is it going to go away? If it's chronic, no, might never. But how can I manage it? How can I still be able to spend time with my kids and spend time with family? Go see the lads down the rugby club. Because you still do those things. But it's probably like a good example is every time someone's sick, growing up and you stay off school, because you had a cold, cough or whatever happened, and you wouldn't go in, and you're like, oh, Mum, I'm going to go outside, get some fresh air. No, you're staying inside. You've got to show people you're sick.
Justify being off.
You have to justify being off, And
you have to drink Lucozade. You have to curl them in the corner.
There's a process you go through, and see people now, you'll see people in workplaces who'll be off, and they feel slightly terrified when they come in, and they're like, oh, yeah, but I said, get yourself out moving. Yeah, but I can't do that. I said, why? Well, I shouldn't be doing that. I said, who tells you shouldn't be doing that? I said, movement's good for your rehab. Get moving. Well, I guess you put it that way. And then slowly they'll start to move. We talk about movement as medicine. The brain loves movement. Any anxiety, any thoughts in our heads tend to slightly go away again. We move. It's a good way to deal with those things. And I think it's just, that's a quality, you have to be able to do those things, kind of just accept it and kind of break the stigma, the norm of how we should, handle ourselves in a given situation.
Yeah, this is how society says I need to operate. However, knowing yourself, being open, being honest, being transparent with yourself to say this is the process I need to follow to get back on track. That's all the stuff that we spoke about.
Yeah.
What's your view on gratitude?
I think it's important. It's probably one of the hardest things to do sometimes.
Yeah.
Without sounding completely twisted, but we all love to receive, but I think it's about giving, but also showing being thankful of people. It's like today, I was quite worried coming here today doing this, really nervous about how it sound like, would they pick up on my Dutch accent, what kind of, things would there be in it. But I think for me it's more, it's learning from this today.
Yeah.
So I say from day, I'll go away from today, I would have thought of some stuff. I've probably said some things I've never said to myself before, but it's just come through my brain. And then I'll take it away and think about, and hopefully be able to, you know, to kind of put that into some kind of context, you know, later on. So.
It's funny you say that. I would say we've probably heard that a couple of times. I look off camera to Jake, my cameraman. We've heard that a few times, haven't we? I think 2 occasions where people said this is about a comfort zone thing, pushing yourself, going against that fear of, oh no, I shouldn't do this, it feels a bit, and it's about how important do you think it is to push your comfort zones every single day?
I think it's good to challenge yourself. Doesn't mean a marathon, but it can be the challenge to speak to a new person. You know, to go make a new friend. Like the rugby club's a really good example. You know, it's my son's own recently moved to Chester Rugby Club. People have been friendly, but as well as they make an effort, you also have to make an effort. So I think it's important to kind of go, you know, make new friends, you know, or new connections. Use connections that are friends. Yeah.
Well, we said on the phone the other day, you obviously played here for a good few years with me. We played a lot of second team together. How have you found coming back into this environment?
Oh, I've loved it. When I moved to the UK first, we were looking at I was looking at other rugby clubs to go down to. My kids played a different rugby club, but I was looking to play for the social side of it, because I think one thing with rugby is it doesn't matter where you travel in the world, if you walk into a rugby club, you've got like new mates.
Instant, yeah.
And I can remember I thought I'd come here and I was nervous, you know, because I was like, what, in my 30s, retired, you know, coming out of retirement again in a way. But came down, saw the lads from the first team that were injured, and they're like, oh, Kev, you know, welcome, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, come down Thursday. I was like, really? So yeah, bring your boots down. And then came down Thursday, and I think on the Saturday I was out playing Birkenhead, you know, and straight away people were there to acknowledge you, to see you, speak with you, and you kind of like, that really helped me. Like moving to the UK was having people come down to, and it was only probably last week I kind of just realised how much I've missed it. So I could have regrets and think, why didn't I come down early with the kids? But it's just one of them things.
Well, it is.
But now I really appreciate it. And my wife probably thinks I'm more happy here than the kids, but I know the kids love it. They think it's brilliant. Yeah. But I've really enjoyed coming back.
Well, you nailed it. That it's one of the big pillars of well-being, which is connection, and reigniting that connection, or just that sense where you feel, I feel at peace here. I can be myself. I can be open, and then kind of layer a bit of nostalgia in there of seeing your lads play on the pitch that you played on. It's all good for the soul, isn't it? It's all good for the heart and good for the soul.
And also, it's people, the ones you played with, you know, and mates you haven't seen maybe for 10 years. They're just sincere. You know, when they ask you how you are, you know they're asking. You know, because they want to know how you are, and I like that. I like the fact that I met yourself, met a couple of the others, you know, and everyone's asking how you are. I love that. You know, because you feel a part of it. You know, connected. Yeah. So purpose in a way, you know, because now my kids serve a purpose. You know, because in the teams they're in a way.
Brilliant. The last thing, we talked a little bit kind of off camera around you as a physio with health anxiety. Are you seeing more of that as a physio with clients that you're working with, or less?
The age bracket, probably between 40 to 50, definitely, yeah. I see a lot of it. It's quite a tough one as well, because like we talk about the challenges, a lot of in the 40s and 50s have these challenges, and I always ask them why they do it. You know, like why do they do it? You know, some do it for charities, some do it for themselves, some might do it because out of pure desperation, because they could have lost people close to them. You know, the same age, you know, that just suddenly fell over. And you do see a lot. You see a lot of blokes. So we tend to have a good chat about it, because we always talk about the purpose, like what they want out of the treatment. You know, what kind of goal. I try to explain my philosophy about the process and the ownership, you know, kind of compliance in a way with the stuff we do. So see a lot of it. It's something I've had mates that have kind of been through, you know, warned me about that it's going to happen, which I'm like completely denied. And then I kind of like went through it myself. You know, and it started as a small thing, but that little seed just grew, and to a point where, you know, I thought everything was wrong with me. And then, like as I mentioned, I had all the tests done and everything was clear, but still I'd see the doubt is just in your head now. And I think it's something that I think blokes probably would help talking to each other about it. You know, so kind of going back to like, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
That you have those worries. I think it's okay to talk about. You know, there are changes in our bodies now. You know, we go from being these, you know, rugby gladiators to couch potatoes, you know, glorified taxi drivers, you know, hype men on the pitch. You know, that's kind of like our roles now. And I sometimes think, you know, finding that identity, you know, what are we now? And then kind of like find it and then celebrate it, you know, celebrate the heck out of it. You know, that we are just super hype men. You know, that can literally chat rubbish on a sideline, you know, about how great we were and how rugby used to be, all this and that. At the same time, looking at the kids thinking, Jesus, you know, they completely put you to dust. Yeah. You know, I don't want my kids tackling me anymore because I know they can injure me. So, but yeah, it's a big thing. And I just think, you know, don't be afraid of talking to people about it. But also find the right people to talk about it. If you don't feel comfortable telling a certain person, don't tell them. Then go look for someone else who might be able to help you.
Yeah, it's a big private thing, isn't it? We say that to kids, speak to trusted adults and people you love, you trust and you respect, but it's the same for us as adults, isn't it? Who you choose to bring into that kind of vulnerable circle or whatever it might be. But it's the benefits of that, having those 2 or 3 areas, those 2 or 3 networks, because at times you will need to do that. Don't need to do it with everyone.
Definitely. The hard part is in some ways, you know, we look back at, like, I know your kids are a bit younger, you know, than mine, and you know, but mine are 15 and 17. You know, it's like I always assume become an adult. You know, and sometimes I think, God, what is my purpose now? Am I just in pure survival mode now? Which honestly, I think sometimes kind of like hits us a bit. Is kind of like the why, you know, and the what. You know, what are we doing? Are we just in survival mode now until we kick the bucket? I'm just going to try to make life as comfortable as possible. And in some ways, I think we are, but at the same time, I think we're also there to support our kids in their journey. You know, it's like it's their chapter now. You know, I wouldn't say we've lived our life. I think we've been through our, you know, great periods where reminiscence, looking back at it, and probably, you know, miss a bit, and we'll see how kids go through it, and you know, again, we'll reflect back in time and tell them the good old stories. But I think it's accepting where we are now. You know, accepting that we're not going to be able to run as fast as we used to do. We're not going to be able to look in a certain way, you know, and just accepting that we are just who we are, try to better ourselves, but better ourselves mentally as well as physically. Physically is important, but mentally as well, you know, science suggests it's super important with stress and heart condition, etc. We've got to be happier.
And what do you think the keys to that? What advice would you give men of a similar age to us where you've got to work on the mental side?
I think we've got to be better at celebrating stuff, even the small things in life. You know, whether it's, I always say sometimes, like, high five each other. You know, showing the gratitude, and be really good at showing gratitude. Because if there's only one way to kind of break a stigma down, a wall down, that is by physically trying to kind of go through it. And I think we have to do that with, like, the niceness, the openness, the kindness. I think that's so important to do more of. And then celebrate the small achievements. Celebrate the process. Celebrate the gold medal, but that gold medal, everyone knows, is so short-lived. As soon as you're posting on your social media, you get your 100 likes if you've got that many friends, 200 likes, but the next day is gone. The story's gone. But what about those weeks of training, those weeks of misery you put yourself through? You know, what have you learned from that process? Loads.
And that's all the stuff for your resilience bucket, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's probably what we have to be better at, actually, in theory, writing down or mentally, you know, being able to store in our head is actually, what have we actually done?
Yeah.
You know, in some ways, when we run a marathon or do a race or do a climb or whatever we do, probably the important part is actually sit down afterwards and reflect on it.
Yeah.
Because the reward of running the 42 kilometers, that's brilliant. You might be fitter. But you lose that fitness within 2 weeks. So, well, what did you learn from it? That's probably something that could be better at.
Yeah, that reflection time. Because we just go on to the next thing, don't we? Let's just keep moving forward in this rapid world we live in.
And let's say you do your half marathon. What's your next step? You know, do you have to do something that's longer than that? And what if you do that? What are you going to do after that? At some point, you're going to hit the wall. So I think it's important to have that reflection. Celebrate, reflect, and just be open with each other.
So that kind of brings us towards the the final bit of the conversation where I ask every guest for their little blackbird worm of wisdom. It's advice, guidance. It might be to your younger self. So what would your little blackbird worm of wisdom be, Kev?
I've been thinking about that because I knew that was going to come. And I think the one I will say, it's okay not to be okay. Just be yourself and just find out what you become. You know, so okay to be you. That'd be my word of wisdom.
Brilliant. Cheers, Kev. Smashed it.
All right.
Cheers, mate.
Good.
I hope you enjoyed Tackling It Together, brought to you by Little Blackbird. If you did, then please hit the subscribe button. Give us a follow on our socials, Little Blackbird Limited. Also, please give us a like and comments on any thoughts that you may have. Let's get these important topics out there and encourage some meaningful, authentic conversations. See you next time. Cheers, and remember, keep smiling.